Our first presenter is going to be Eddie and he is the co-founder and CEO of Copper Banking. He's going to be presenting on Gen Z retail insights, which we're very excited about. And that's what we're all here to hear, not me. So I'm going to fade into the background. I'm going to let Eddie do his thing.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill. Great to see everybody. It's early in the morning here in Seattle. Really excited to share our background, and let me just go ahead and get started. All right. Can I just get a thumbs up that I'm sharing the right screen here? It's always the fun part of technology. Make sure we're doing the right thing. Okay.
Thumbs up.
Um,
Good.
all right. Sounds good. Really excited to connect with everybody. The focus of today is really we're going to get started kind of talking through our unique background at Copper. Full disclosure, I am not the seasoned research and insights professional. We really fell into building a pretty large Gen Z teen and family panel by way of building really the first primary bank account for this generation that truly teaches them about money. So what we're going to do is get started and really kind of go through just kind of how we built this panel that is deriving a lot of, I think, really quality observed behavior that we see, and then obviously the qualitative side of a lot of the research that we'll show today. So go through kind of how we built that unique perspective. Although I haven't been a market research professional for 20 years, my co-founder and I are extreme experts for the last 17 years building technology companies for Gen Z and previous generations throughout those years. So very, very versed in large consumer scale for teens, parents, and families. Then what we're going to get into, I think hopefully this will be a fun one, as far as the content goes for today, really talk about work, side hustle, and games, and how the heck that actually is translating into China dominating the next generation of shopping carts. So my hope is to weave that story together for you in a pretty unique way with a lot of the insights that we've derived. And then, yeah, would love to open it up for a Q&A. We spent a lot of time in this space and have been doing a lot of research recently and would love to get questions, feedback, and get started from there. All right. So this is, who we are is really the first of its kind banking and investing platform for teens and parents. The reason we built this business really comes, as I mentioned, on, just quick background on myself, about 17 years building trust, really at large consumer scale with teens and families. The last business we co-founded about 8 years ago was the first fundraising platform for schools that actually brought that whole door-to-door process of selling candy bars, cookie dough. If you've had kids, you've had to go door to door and have them sell these products for fundraisers. We actually brought that whole process online so that you could ask friends and family for money, raise a lot more money in a lot less time, built that audience up to about 17 million teens and parents. And really the catalyst, if you're wondering how we got to build a banking product, was we had a lot of banks reach out to us and say, hey, you've got this large captive customer base that you build trust with in this teen and parent segment. Have you ever thought of putting a credit card in their hands early? Would you build us a family banking product so that we could really bring all these customers to our bank? And what that got us realizing was just how low the bar has been set for under 18 banking. If there's some parents on the call, I'm sure you guys know this firsthand. Your big five bank account is just not really focused on teaching your teen about money. The other thing we realized is that there really was very little financial education being taught in schools. And so what's been unique about how we built this large panel and user base is we literally go into high schools across America, run free financial education workshops to really introduce our product at kind of the age of 14, which has become really the first consumer banking inflection point. So we're going to talk a lot today about what's changed in the last 10 years. That's one of the biggest things that's changed is that, you know, historically you would set up your first bank account, you know, when you would go to the student union building in college. I had that experience where you'd go and get pitched the Discover card within the student union building. Now that cash has become obsolete, that first consumer banking inflection point is now happening freshman year of high school. And so we spent a tremendous amount of time in this space, and really excited to share how we've gotten there. So quite simply, as I mentioned, when we got started, it seems like a pretty obvious thing to build, but we wanted to build really the first bank account for a young person that truly taught them about money. So what this includes today is they have a real debit card. There's a mobile banking app that's attached to that as well. And really, at the end of the day, we want to build financial education directly into the product that you're using every single day. One thing I'm just going to touch on a little bit is really how uniquely we've thought about this space and how it's driven a lot of the insights that we're going to go into here kind of in the second half of the presentation. The biggest insight that we've really derived is how we actually had targeted customers. And so if I would have went to my mom when I was in high school and said, "Hey, I found this great banking product. It provides me, you know, the ability to invest, send money within our family, start to learn about money through this account," she probably would have smacked me, right? Because if you're a parent, you've historically made that decision on where your family banks. The big insight we're going to talk about today, and it's really proven out in our traction, is that this generation is really powerful within decision making in the household. And what that has translated to is we actually have introduced our product to the teen first. And so this is one of the kind of core cornerstones of a Gen Z insight that we'll talk about as far as family decision making. But really, just at a high level, that has allowed us to acquire these bank accounts at a cost 10, you know, over 10 to 100 times lower than consumer banks are paying. The median age, as I mentioned, is about 14 years old. And then the average time to set up an account, you know, Bill talked a little bit about how tough COVID was. COVID was actually awesome for Copper. And the reason that that was is that bank branches weren't opened. We pride ourselves in a very, very quick time from the time that you register to getting your digital card issued to set up an account in less than 10 minutes. So what's really unique about this wedge, and all this will really start to make sense here in a second, as far as how we've thought about, you know, building the panel and driving these insights, is that, as I mentioned before, we actually had found that Gen Z as the teen first wedge for us has basically been the wedge into building trust within families. So on our platform, we have 1.9 teens per family. We acquire that teen first through the financial education workshops that we do across the country. Again, parents will approve those accounts, fund them, but really what we found is that we want that Gen Zer to feel like they're driving the process, right? Even though legally underneath the hood, parents are involved as they've been for the last 20, 30 years, it's been really essential to how we actually built the product. And then from there, we obviously bring across the rest of the family. So half of Americans are divorced. And as we know, managing those finances within the family are really, really huge, especially from that, you know, divorced parent. And so with that one wedge, we start to go down this family network and build a very, very sticky relationship that really hasn't existed before. And again, that insight that we have is really that Gen Zer as being the driver of the whole account relationship. So I think as a lot of folks, we kind of fell into this pretty incredible panel. We've grown as far as scale to over 3 million members in the last 2 years. A lot of that has just been built on our expertise of, again, going to market within this space. And what's been pretty cool about that, as we think about what that, you know, provides access to from an insights perspective, is really the 360 degrees of insight within not just the spend side of it, but also being able to really provide access from a permission perspective to teens. We had an awesome time at SampleCon. It was my first personally, and didn't really realize I think how difficult it's been within the research industry to do qualitative research and really know for 100% fact that you have not the parent, but the teen that's providing the survey responses. The other thing that we're going to touch on within the presentation is really a lot of the observed behavior because we are that first primary bank account. So what we're able to observe is merchant level data down to the SKU level as well with our receipt capture product, which again is a core pillar of financial education as we provide teens the ability to also earn money through Copper and really drive those insights there as well. So really excited to kind of walk through some of those insights that we've learned today. What I want to start with, though, is really, you know, our frame of reference with the Gen Z revolution. The slide used to say that they're coming, they're definitely here. Now we're starting even moving into Gen Alpha for a lot of the customers on our platform, but is really a generation that has been built, you know, from the online world, is now entering the workforce and is really compelling other generations to adapt to them and not vice versa. And what this really means and why this is such a big deal is that, you know, this slide, when I first built it, we were at about 30% of the global population. Gen Z now makes up 40% plus of the global population. From an income and spending power perspective, is a massive consumer segment, as we know. And then what we learned really early on is that Gen Z is very powerful within decision making in the household. So if you're a parent of a Gen Zer, I think you know this firsthand, and I'm probably preaching to the choir. But whether that's what technology is consumed, what's bought at the grocery store, and what we've seen in our over 3 million members, which I think is the most telling, is that of all of the parents that bank with Copper, that have big five banking relationships at Chase, Bank of America, Wells, large regional banks, they've all decided to open their first primary bank account for their kid at Copper. And what's unique about that is that we've introduced the product to that teen first, and they've been successful in actually getting their parent to trust us with their most, you know, arguably sensitive part of their financial life. And so I think that this is a really, really key insight as we think about how this generation not only motivates purchasing behavior for themselves, but for the entire family as a whole. The smartphone statistic, I think at this point is pretty much, of course, we get it, but is obviously a smartphone first generation where everything is consumed, you know, digitally within that phone that they have within their hand, and is obviously a key part of how they motivate decision making within the household. So the first thing that I really want to touch on is really these insights on independence. We sit at this unique intersection of really being able to understand where, you know, since we have their first primary bank account, we also have all the data from a direct deposit perspective, understanding really how independence plays into, you know, views around employment. So what we see is a very compelling consumer shift into the digital forms of employment when we look at our observed direct deposit data. So what's really interesting here is there is a massive attention with about 57% of Gen Z sees becoming an influencer as a reputable career. What's interesting about that is, you know, about the same percentage of them would like to be an influencer if they'd be given a chance. And then a similar percentage, and even more at 65%, would prefer to work for themselves versus a company. And so what I think is really interesting here is we see this cultural thought of independence really starting to redefine, you know, the thought of traditional W-2 employment. I think that we also see this extend, you know, much further beyond just Gen Z into Gen Alpha, and then even into how millennials are thinking about work as well. There's 200 million influencers worldwide. And one of the things that we wanted to dive into is this is a pretty hot topic around how work is being redefined. But is this here yet, or is it coming? What we see in looking directly at the direct deposit data And payments data we have, again, at pretty large scale with over 3 million members and millions and upon millions of monthly transactions, is that the creator economy is still likely more of a side hustle, but one in which a massive percentage of this generation is engaging in. So when we look at that data, we see that about 72% of folks still have less than $500 in annual earnings. So it is still, from an adoption perspective, more of a side hustle than it is truly, just despite what you may see in the headlines, their first, their first job or their primary form of employment. We then see that, we have about 17% of folks that are in those 500 to about 5,000 in annual earnings, and then a really small percentage at about 2% that are at 50,000 plus in annual earnings, within this creator economy. What I think is really interesting here is that, our takeaway is that side hustle is very alive. It's definitely growing, but it's not at a point where, it is the primary form of employment. If we look at kind of more of the macro trends, I think we see that we have an inflection point that is already coming. If you look at self-employment continuing to rise, at about 10% since the pandemic, despite, that overall, flat line of total workers entering the workforce from that perspective as well. So there's a lot of side hustle money out there. Where is it going? So what we look at, and in this specific qualitative study, the N was about 7,000 for this one. We wanted to really understand where from when we observe our card data and looking at obviously top spending categories and top three being in gaming, where within gaming are most of these transactions going? For the parents on the call, you may know this all too well if you have a copper card, but if you don't, I'm sure there's been a lot of conversations within the household around this. But there is a tremendous amount of this money that is going to gaming. 68% of the respondents in this study are making weekly in-game purchases. And so 23% of them are spending more than $10 a week with in-app purchases. What we see here are, this isn't just the subscriptions, to an Xbox Live or a PlayStation account that just gives them access to play with their friends, but these are in actual in-app purchases. So buying skins within games, needing to spend money to up level faster within the games that they're playing. And it is a massive, massive multi-billion-dollar economy that this generation is heavily investing in. When we look at our, top three spending categories, we obviously see gaming as one of the top ones, and also have, obviously a tremendous amount being spent within retail, and then quick serve food as well. So really, how does this, contribute to China dominating the next generation shopping carts? So the graph on the right here is really looking at the last 36 months of high volume purchase data, and really looking at the surge of both Shein and Temu relative to the typical large retail marketers like Walmart, and obviously Amazon.com. And so what we've seen here, over really starting in the start of 2023 is just the massive surge within these platforms, especially Temu, and taking market share really within this generation specifically. What we've seen, is really that massive pace of Temu really, really accelerating. In the past, Chinese warehouses were really just pure suppliers, but what Gen Z has really provided is an opportunity to change all of that. One of the core things we've seen is really how gamification and social commerce, and then the side hustle nature of drop shipping has really all converged into what we start to see as a domination of where a lot of this generation is spending their money. Um, it's really interesting when we have, conversations with our teens, just really around how they've thought about engaging in these platforms. At the end of the day, the lowest price always wins, especially with a price sensitive generation. But it's been pretty incredible to see how quickly this resurgence has come. If you go deeper within to how, some of these products are really structured and built, gamification is really at the core of the entire user experience in a way that you haven't seen within commerce, I think, ever. And so you obviously have a generation that, for better or worse, has, really very quick attention spans. When we look at the top, the top used social media platforms, TikTok is obviously one of the primary ones. And as you look at kind of the conditioning of how fast they're consuming media and understanding how they can really get from one place to another, these products have done an incredible job of keeping that attention. And, and ancillary to this is TikTok Shop as well. So again, having the ability to have this social commerce and gamification of these products has been massive, and really driving the attention, across this user base. So yeah, I'm gonna, we've got a good amount of time for questions here. Wanted to open it up and see what questions you all have. We've got a pretty pretty unique perspective at Copper and a lot of the observed data that we can see really across our user base and platforms. And hope this has been helpful at a high level to kind of dive into the insights of this next generation.
Okay. Yeah, if anybody has questions, drop them in the Q&A or into the chat. Um, and we'll get those read off for Eddie. Um, I don't know. As the researcher, I think I saw the virtual jaws hit the floor when you see an N of 7,000 for a Gen Z research study. That doesn't happen. So that's fascinating that you have this captive audience and the behavioral data to go with. Um, so incredibly interesting. Looks like Danielle has a question. Um, how did you build with regard to the panel? How did you build it up, and how do
Yep.
you market that to your customers?
Yeah, really good question, Danielle. So this is probably a story that you haven't ever heard before in our space, but we go across America and partner with high schools. We've partnered with about 3,000 high schools, and what we do is we have school partnership managers that physically go into high schools and kind of all of the key markets, key NFL cities. And run financial education workshops and also provide a curriculum that maps to state financial education grad requirements. And so what's been super cool about this is when we started, 0 states required personal finance to graduate from high school. Now we're upwards of 30. And what ended up happening was, we'd go into a school, we'd run a financial education workshop, and the teachers would say, "Hey, this is awesome, but my district is telling me I need to get my kids to graduate to these personal finance standards. Can you give me a curriculum?" So we invested about 4 to 5 million of our own money to build a curriculum that maps to the state standards. And really is just a long-winded way of saying we introduce financial education through your first primary bank account. The teen invites the parent. The parent approves and KYCs the account. What's cool about KYC is we're required for banking secrecy laws and to open a bank account in the US to have them be as verified as they humanly can be, right? We have a social security number, a photo ID, a selfie verification, and then the parent, if they'd like their kid to be able to earn through Copper, allows them to enable earn, provide us permission to access so that when we want to run a study, it shows up within their app. We profiled them, within this process. And then what's been really cool, as we talk to, folks within CPG or otherwise, we can actually also bring in the transaction level data into the targeting there. And so the panel is very large. We have, I think, the ability to fulfill some studies with some pretty niche targeting. We're not really doing any research at Copper right now, so we just want to provide this awesome panel to, to folks like yourselves. But yeah, that's kind of how we built it. I can tell you it's a lot of work. We weren't planning on kind of doing this, and just realized, wow, there's a pretty unique opportunity here and again, Gen Z wants to give their feedback. And so I think the last thing we're trying to figure out is if there's a way for us to really connect the impact of their feedback and research to the decisions that large companies are making. I think that would be really cool.
Yeah, other questions for Eddie? I have one, and that's just, I guess, what types of studies have you, I guess, found, most appetite for? I mean, this is a fairly new endeavor, and
Yeah.
what types of interest have you had, and research have you conducted?
Yeah, so we've done all kinds of stuff. I think as far as, we've done a couple studies really focused on, large social media where you have what I would recommend is LOI is super important here. We've done studies that are 30 plus minutes from an LOI perspective, but the content of those studies does need to be pretty engaging. The preference here would be really focusing on the research and survey design to be as direct and concise as possible. So, ideally being kind of in the 12 to 15 minute LOI on the high end. So yeah, I mean that a couple of those studies I'm specifically thinking about were pretty involved with going to specific social media platforms and doing the quantitative side of it. We've also had the unique opportunity since we have this in-school presence and this regional presence to do qualitative research as well. So, we have, kind of what you might think to be really tough kind of product testing, type of qualitative work that we can provide access to as well.
Okay. And obviously, it's a platform, and the value proposition is targeted at teens, obviously. But as folks adopt, use, and begin to age out, as it were, what's that process tending to look like?
Yeah, so we have a pretty big panel now building really kind of in the young adult 18 to 25 demographic as well. Candidly, as I mentioned, we knew that there's 4 million new 14-year-olds that enter freshman year of high school every year. And that was the moment in which, as I mentioned before, they have the pain with their families of, historically it's 20s flying out of the ATM so you can give your kids money. Well, the pandemic made cash, kind of obsolete from that perspective. And so a lot of those families are now aging up, going to college, getting their first jobs. And so we have a pretty active panel now that's, kind of in the 18 to 25 range now that we've been at this 4+ years. And so, I think that those panelists are remaining on the platform. And again, we'll continue to build that side of the audience there as well.
Okay. It looks like Judy has a question. Curious about if this is available for students not yet in high school.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we have users on Copper that are as young as, 7, 8 years old. And obviously from a PII perspective and COPA, we don't allow those those customers to go through and register on their own. Parents have to actually get started, but then invite invite their kid to the platform. If you guys haven't checked it out, it's an awesome product. We spend a lot of time and money where banks have it. So there's you can set up an investing account for your kid where they're investing real money, but getting rich slow, right? So what's cooler than owning one ticker? Tesla is owning Tesla and another 1,000 stocks. So we put them in a risk-adjusted portfolio that's just for teen, much like you'd get if you had a private wealth manager. But again, really kind of teaching them this get rich slow mentality. We've got a feature called Divvy where you can take a percentage of any money that's sent from aunts and uncles from their paycheck that automatically gets divvied into their investing bucket, their spend bucket. It's a really, really cool product from that perspective. And then the earn product is honestly our most popular because what kid doesn't want to earn a little bit of extra money and do it in a way that they can then budget it and really understand how to build up their financial knowledge.
Very cool. Any final questions for Eddie? Yeah, just fascinating. I mean, I've spent, a lot of my career in financial services research and fintech, and this is just a very unique sort of, offshoot of all that, and just very, very cool. That's all I got.
Well, yeah. Yeah, my email's on here as well. So if you have any kind of follow-up questions or thoughts or any thoughts on the study side and getting access to the panel, we're here and would love to work with you on. And Bill, really, really appreciate having us on.